Hey everyone, welcome back to The Tent, your place for politics, policy, and progress. I'm your host, Colin Seaberger. As our regular listeners know, Daniela Gibbs-Leger departed the Center for American Progress Action Fund last week, and while we miss her dearly here on The Tent, we remain committed to providing you, our listeners, with honest, engaging, and compelling conversations with the people who are shaping politics, policy, and progress in this country. I know we're going to have a lot of fun, and I hope you'll join us. Now, on to today's episode. The Epstein files have been dominating the news over the last few weeks as more and more information comes to light about President Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. This story represents a rare opportunity for Democrats and Republicans to unite in shared criticism of the president. But we also wanted to figure out how communicators should juggle talking about the revelations about the president's proximity to Jeffrey Epstein, while also hammering home the devastating harms of his agenda, from everything from his reckless trade war that's jacking up prices to his recent One Big Beautiful Bill Act being signed into law that's going to take healthcare away from millions and millions of people. So as the clock ticks down on the 2026 midterms, we wanted to bring someone on to discuss how folks should walk this tightrope. To help me figure it out, I've invited an old colleague, Jesse Lee, to talk us all through it. And stick around for a moment of joy after the interview, because we could all use some levity in these dark times. Jesse Lee is a political communications expert with experience at just about every level of government. He's worked in the White House, the House of Representatives, at the DNC and DCCC, and even served as the Vice President of Communications here at Cap Action. Heck, Jesse is even an old host of the Tent podcast, so we are thrilled to welcome him back. Jesse, it's good to have you.
Good to be here. Always a pleasure.
So, with so much going on in the world, it's really easy to have, some really important headlines slip under the radar. But one that has gotten the attention of the American people for many weeks now is this scandal surrounding the Epstein files and the Trump administration's efforts to conceal them from the public. I'm sure you know the House of Representatives, Mike Johnson, actually ended up sending members home on vacation for August recess early, shutting down the chamber in order to prevent votes on actually releasing the Epstein files. I am curious, what do you make of this whole situation? And how do you think that Democrats should be talking about this?
Yeah, well, it really has been kind of a fascinating thing to watch on so many levels. But, really the thing that, goes to the heart of it for me is, well, it's just corruption. I mean, he's the most corrupt president that we have ever had. And Democrats kind of talked themselves out of attacking him on that early in his first term. I think on the assumption that well, everybody knew he was corrupt and he got elected anyway, so we might as well not bother. But I think that was a big mistake. I think, when I was at the Center for American Progress, we kind of helped spearhead the culture of corruption narrative in 2018 midterms, and it was extremely effective. And, what we're seeing now is that that culture of corruption, that Republican culture of corruption is back, and it's far worse than it ever was before.
That's right.
And, to me, this is something where, that's not a sideshow when you start talking about it that way. That connects to everything else. You look at the reconciliation bill, and Democrats have, landed, I think, on the right message in terms of the fact that this, raises healthcare costs, raises energy costs, hurts working people to benefit billionaires and political donors. There's a word for that. It's called corruption, right?
Yeah.
And so this is all part of the same story. To me, this is the opportunity for Democrats to really start making this case in a way where the news of the day, the scandals of the day, the kind of pull your hair out, how did that happen? News of the day starts to accumulate into, a coherent critique of what's happening here. Even when we talk about, oligarchy or fascism or democracy being on the line, really, what you're talking about there is corruption. That's what dictatorship is about. That's what Putin is about. This is about corruption, me, more for my friends. And there's a reason Trump sees those as his models, because that is just unadulterated corruption. That's what he's trying to instill here. And the Jeffrey Epstein thing just happens to be something, an example of it, where, it's really kind of horrific to even look at.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're totally right. It's like all of these just kind of daily news events really kind of build up into something that is too big to ignore, right? I mean, we saw earlier this week, I'm sure you saw the reporting from Punchbowl News that the White House has actually been aggressively lobbying Republican senators to oppose a ban on congressional stock trading that would also apply to the president and the vice president. And this coming from the same guy who ran, on a drain the swamp platform. It is breathtaking, the kind of corruption that we are seeing. Jesse, I'm curious to get your take on this Epstein story. Is interesting in that there are so few issues that we have seen Republican voters really break from the president on ever since he entered the political scene. And yet, some polls have shown that upwards of about 40% of Republican voters have actually said that they disapprove of how this administration is handling the whole Epstein files release or non-release, right? I am curious to get your sense for, are there other issues that Democrats should be trying to lean into as points of friction within the Republican Party that you think, right now they have not been doing, or they should be doubling down and doing a lot more of?
Right. Well, it's interesting. I talked about kind of driving that culture of corruption narrative in 2018, and a big part of that was aiming at Trump's cabinet, right? Because just like now, it was made up of these kind of elite billionaires who were enriching themselves, who thought they were above the law, who were, enjoying perks that nobody else possibly would. And, I look at Pam Bondi, right? That's kind of one of the big cracks here where they started to revolt. And, uh, sure enough, all you have to do is look under the hood. And, Public Citizen just put out a report about how Pam Bondi's former lobbying firm is just raking it in hand over fist, getting the administration to do whatever they want. And,
Mm.
you can kind of look across the board, and the entire cabinet is just made up of these people that are just kind of, pigs at the trough, as the old saying goes. And, these are not people that are generally beloved by Laura Loomer or whatever, these are, uh, the cabinet is basically kind of serving the role that ambassadors, traditionally have for kind of both parties, where, it doesn't really matter, has it in most countries. And so you give it to somebody who's connected, or you give it to a donor or something. And, that's not a great practice, but it's certainly shouldn't be elevated to the cabinet
Sure.
where,
The Treasury Secretary or,
right,
yeah.
right, exactly. The energy secretary is just, some fossil fuel billionaire who's trying to put the competition out of business,
Yeah.
and, bringing in, issuing fake climate reports with hand-picked climate denialists. And, it's just absurd. And this is stuff that, is costing people money. So, I think there's a big kind of wedge to drive there where, picking off these people where there is kind of an antitrust streak in some of the MAGA movement. And,
Mm.
the cabinet's not doing that. The cabinet's doing the opposite. The people who do antitrust in the Department of Justice are getting fired. Um, so,
Yeah.
I do think that's one of the places where you can start to kind of, make poster children out of people.
Speaking of, this administration increasing cost, you mentioned the cost of healthcare, the cost of utilities. Of course, this is not just in reference to the president's big marquee beautiful bill act, right? But also you look at the tariffs, right? They're up to nearly a 20% average tariff rate. It's the highest in over a century. Um, all of these things together paint a real clear picture. What do Democrats need to do in order to make sure that that message sticks?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that is the right question. And, like I say, I think the message is right that, they're making the cost of living crisis worse in order to benefit the wealthy. I think the tariffs is a good example where, increasingly you have the Treasury Secretary, waving around, oh, this is all the tariff revenue we brought in over the first 6 months. And it's like, yeah, but that's middle class people paying that. And
Yep.
meanwhile, you're spitting it right out the other end in these giant billionaire tax cuts. But, I think, and I saw Bessent talk today about how, the Trump bonds or whatever are actually, quote, a backdoor way to privatize Social Security. It's kind of like, well, what's going on here? But I do think, you're asking the right question that, we are in this attention economy where uh, we've got this kind of circus conductor as president. And if you don't have something that packs a punch to carry your message, people, stuff talking about, prioritizing middle class families, et cetera. Like I said, it's the right message, but it's very forgettable. It's tough to compete with that message when you've got all these other fireworks going off. And that's part of why I do think, especially at this moment, especially with the Epstein stuff kind of cracking things open, embracing that corruption narrative as part of it, it is a big part of where, Democrats should go. And they need to make the connection between, this is an example of Trump, protecting his billionaire friends over, the most innocent of victims, right?
Yeah.
And this is just this massive cover up across, across his government at the highest levels. And that's just how he operates. It's always going to be him and his billionaire friends ahead of you, and you need to look at his one signature bill, and you can see it written all over it. It is all about benefiting his billionaire friends and donors at your expense.
Well, you talked a bit about it being the right message, right? And I think that you and I are certainly in agreement on that. I also think, and you sure know this as a communications expert, we are in an attention economy, and we're in an attention economy that is driven by personalities, right? Obviously, Trump is the perfect manifestation of that. Um, I want to get your thoughts on Rebecca Katz, who's a fellow political communications expert. She wrote an op-ed immediately following Zohran Mamdani's New York City mayoral primary win, where she really pushed the party to be embracing candidates who may seem risky or may aggravate some people because they challenge the status quo. She said, quote, "Sometimes we have to try new things, and when we do find candidates who resonate, we should welcome them into the tent and try to figure out how to do that," right? So I'm curious for your reaction. Do you think that that's right? Are there certain personality qualities that you think better position the party to kind of command that limited supply of attention that's still left to be gotten? And if so, how should the party think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to some extent. You know, there's no amount of analysis that I could do that would compete with kind of, the proof is in the pudding. When I look
Yeah.
at kind of Democratic figures who have broken through, that I hear their voices, that it kind of sticks with me. Tim Walz has done it. Honestly, Kamala Harris at the beginning of her campaign did it, and I think, part of, I think she was cast an impossible task, but part of where she if her campaign fell off at all is when she stopped kind of embracing that attention grabbing energy and
Mm.
kind of tried to be more reassuring and feel, more of just a normal candidate. But I think she's capable of it. I think that is always going to be difficult for a party leader, whether that's Jeffries or Schumer. So because you're just representing too much, so I don't expect that out of them. I have seen uh flashes of that from Wes Moore, but I don't think anybody would identify him as the person who has broken through. Um, I think Gretchen Whitmer has done that in Michigan. I'm not sure she's done that outside of Michigan as
Mm.
much.
Hmm.
I mean, if you just knew uh, Gretchen Whitmer from seeing her in an occasional national speech, Democratic convention or something, you know, you wouldn't know that back in Michigan she's Big Gretch and that she, has Michigan rappers doing videos about her and like she's kind of a phenom, Pete Buttigieg is out there, every day engaging the tough audiences, going to
Yeah.
podcasts that are not, softball interviews. And, you know, there's no question he gets credit for that. And that is a big part of what Democrats need to learn how to do. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. He's gotta kind of get the rest of the Democratic base on board too, right? So yeah, we'll see. I think it is going to be hard for anybody to really break out of the pack before the midterms, but people are going to be looking for it not too long after that.
Yeah. I mean, you even see, some of the folks who are, floated out there. People like Andy Bashir, or like has been front and center battling Republicans, whether it's on Fox News or, in his local paper, right, or on Midas Touch or other podcasts. Taking Republicans to task for making these historic cuts to Medicaid. And I think at a meeting, the moment of the challenge that, America finds itself in. And I think it is somewhat for kind of the broader center left to lean into the fights when they come our way, not shirk from them or say, uh, we really want to talk about these three issues and don't really want to talk about these three issues. Um, uh, and instead is really get in the ring, duke it out, and show that you're strong enough to compete and go toe to toe.
Yeah.
Um, Jesse, just to totally pivot directions here, I am super excited to talk to you this week in particular because I know that you've done some work with climate power, and we have actually had this administration just kind of left me breathless earlier this week. I was reading about the EPA administrator, Lee Zeldin, is actually revoking an endangerment finding regulation, which basically affirms that greenhouse gases actually do pose a public health threat. What what does this actually mean for people? Why should they care? And who stands to benefit from this?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it is breathtaking, literally and figuratively. climate denial is now the law of the land, right? All of the scientists have been fired, and they've been replaced by, apparently five handpicked, you know, climate kooks, that Secretary Wright picked to write a kind of fake report. And as a result, the federal government just doesn't recognize climate change or the fact that it poses any threat whatsoever. And, what it means for people is that, uh, the floodgates are open for just endless toxins in your air. I mean, polluters now have absolutely just, you know, uh, uh, freedom all over the country to just pollute the air as much as they want, pollute the water as much as they want. And, this is all after, the EPA has basically been completely gutted, right? And all of this is, the New York Times actually just published a story basically taking this all back to, like I said, the basement of Mar-a-Lago, where,
Mm.
Trump brought in all of the, oil executive billionaires and said, "Hey, I've got a deal for you." He called it a deal. And I think you should raise $1 billion for my campaign, and I will give you everything you want. I will let you pollute as much as you want. I will kill off the clean energy competition so that you can have your monopoly back and be able to gouge people as much as you want. It's going to be quite a deal for you. And he's followed through. The reconciliation bill was a huge part of it. He did a lot of executive actions before that, going back to day one. And this kind of official climate denial, which really, just brings the whole kind of the whole structure of regulating, pollution, and especially carbon pollution, but not just carbon pollution, crashing down. That's just beyond anything that these oil executives could have hoped for. And, I can't emphasize enough on all of this stuff, from the cabinet to the reconciliation bill to this. This is so much more extreme than even the first Trump term.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at some of the cabinet members, RFK Jr., Kash Patel, even Tulsi Gabbard. These are people that Trump wouldn't have even bothered trying to nominate in his first term because the Senate Republicans would have said, no, I'm afraid not. And that's just not there anymore. What you have is, really a fundamentally authoritarian party. And one of the big kind of drivers behind the wheel of that authoritarianism is the oil and gas lobby, and they are doing everything in their power to just, use the government as a tool to, pollute as much as they can, to rack up the profits as much as they can. You're going to see your utility bills going through the roof, not just this year, not just next year, for the next 10 years, because we don't have enough power. We don't have enough energy because the oil and gas lobby got them to kill wind and solar as much as they possibly could.
Well, speaking of kind of radical figures who, many of them are even more extreme than the first term, but one of them is a retread from 2020, and is, I think most people would agree, easily one of the most extreme figures, is Project 2025 architect and current Office of Management and Budget Director Russ Vought, who has really been kind of at the tip of the spear for the administration in executing some of its most lawless, post-constitutional kind of approach to governing, just flat out ignoring laws that are passed by Congress to decide, hey, those after-school programs that Congress funded, we're not going to give the money out to. Or, hey, those scientific research grants that the NIH funds so we can find cures for cancer or Alzheimer's, actually, those are frozen. So we're talking about real world impacts here, right? And I raise Rust vote because the federal government is about to, run out of money. Basically, we fund the government until the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th. And, as we look beyond kind of this August recess period for Congress, but look to what's really going to be a big topic of conversation in September, maybe throughout the fall, is this government funding fight. And, I think there's a lot of people who think, that didn't go too well for Democrats back in March of this year. How should Democrats be thinking about approaching that fight? And what should they be keeping in mind in order to show the American people that they're tough enough and that they're tough enough to go to bat for them and can actually make a real tangible difference in their lives?
Yeah, it's funny you start with Russ Vogt because, I was brought in by Speaker Pelosi to help run and stand up the first impeachment war room against Trump over the withheld Ukraine military funding, right? And of course, there's a full circle on that too. But, the person who actually pulled the levers and made that happen inside OMB was Russ Vogt.
Yep.
And, as soon as Project 2025 started emerging and I saw his name on it, I was like, okay, so what they're going to do is take the approach that Trump got impeached for, quite rightly. Um, and they're going to apply that across government. And that's exactly what we've seen, right?
Yep.
They've looked at, the United States Treasury basically as one giant opportunity to extort everybody else in the country. This is their money to withhold until Trump personally gets some benefit from the person receiving it. And, all the examples you mentioned are perfect examples. But, one of the witnesses that we called, the expert witnesses we called during that impeachment, gave an analogy of just imagine if you had a president who there was a natural disaster somewhere in the country and he told a governor, unless you come out and do what I say, I'm not giving you the disaster aid. I'm not giving you that FEMA support. And of course, that's just standard fare now.
Yeah.
Maryland and Westmore, who I mentioned before, they're not getting their money. No good reason. And so yes, what you're talking about is, the approach that's been applied across government. And I think, the way Democrats should be looking at this next funding fight, and, probably the way they should have looked at the last funding fight is that you have to break that fundamentally. And to some extent, breaking that approach is more important even than one specific policy win. So, to be concrete about it, what I might do in their shoes is to say, um, uh, we are not voting to help you with any funding legislation and to keep the government open, and until you restore your unilateral cuts to Social Security and the Veterans Affairs.
Yep.
And if you don't do that, there's no point in us, negotiating here because you're just going to keep, sacrificing working people unilaterally, no matter what we negotiate. And so, if we see you restore those cuts as we're demanding, then we can negotiate. We can start having, a serious budget process again. And, in that scenario, it's the shutdown is not the leverage. It's not that the government shut down and now you get to make Trump look bad because, this thing isn't working or that thing's not working. The leverage is these horrific cuts to Social Security and the Veterans Affairs Administration that are hurting real people and them having to defend that every day and insist that no, no, we are going to keep those cuts. We are going to make it so that seniors can't get their phone calls answered to get their checks, and field offices are closing, and they've got some rogue AI, and they're doing ridiculous things. And by the way, where are they now? What happened to Big Balls? Big Balls is over at the Social Security Administration, you know, playing God with your personal information. And so I think, if Democrats can stand together on that, they can win that argument, because Republicans are not going to want to be in the position of defending those cuts. There's a reason those cuts are not in those rescission packages that get sent
Yep.
down to Congress, because Republicans don't want anything to do with them. And Democrats can win an argument that says, you know, this government would be open right now if Republicans and the Trump administration would agree to just reverse their cuts that are hurting our seniors and hurting our veterans. And if you win that fight, then you've broken that kind of extra constitutional hold that you were talking about, where you've started to restore the power of the purse to Congress, you know, from Rust vote, and from Trump himself. And once you've broken that spell a little bit, you can start to kind of, trench warfare, go after the next pot and the next pot and the next pot. Like national parks can be next.
Obviously, these are very trying times. That said, I think that, at least from my perspective, I think the last few weeks offer some opportunity for hope. As we've seen kind of Democrats put Republicans on defense over this Jeffrey Epstein scandal. But are there other things that stand out to you as, reasons to get fired up or reasons to have some optimism? And, for folks who want to get involved, what should they be doing in this moment?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think as for what people should be doing right now, we're going into congressional recess, and a big part of what is going to kind of determine, the midterms and really the future of the country is going to be whether Republicans feel the heat on the votes that they just took to gut Medicaid, to kill clean energy, all to benefit their billionaire donors. And if they don't feel the heat, I think our country's going to be in trouble a little bit, because it's going to be a permission structure for them to just keep going, and to, have every Republican presidency be like this, forever and ever. And for, Republicans to do whatever they can to interfere with the elections going forward. We're seeing the Texas redistricting, which
Yep.
is an absurd situation happening right now. But, the American people have the power to stop all of this. And, you know, the fact that Republicans are going to be home, they left, as you said, kind of running for their lives from the Epstein scandal. But, if it can become clear over the next month that, they're going to pay a price for what they did, then, you know, it's going to be a very different vibe for the next year going into the midterms. And, they're going to start to feel like they're on the defensive, and they have to find ways to distance themselves from Trump, and, you know, uh, find ways to tone and make themselves look moderate. And, I don't think it's likely to be very successful, but, you know, it will kind of have a ripple effect where it starts to constrain Trump, who desperately wants to avoid losing the House. So, that is my, biggest kind of, that's not exactly the kind of chipper, good news Instagram story maybe you were asking for. But in terms of, what am I hoping for? I'm hoping, I know people are outraged. I've seen it. I've talked to them. I just know that they need to kind of take this next month and make sure that they spend one day making sure that, a Republican in power somewhere hears about it.
It's an opportunity. It's got to go get seized. And with that, everybody has their homework Jesse Lee, Professor. Thanks so much for joining us on the 10.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks so much.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for us this week. Please go back and check out previous episodes. I do have Muggs here with us.
Hello.
Yes, here to break down this week's most important pop culture moments.
Oh, so important, because I'm so in the know on pop culture, specifically when it comes to movie musicals.
Movie musicals. We will get to that in just a second. But none of us have been having as much fun this past week as one former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, who folks may have seen, hit the mayhem ball for Lady Gaga's new tour in San Francisco. She was just having the time of her life.
As she should. I mean, there's a lot going on in the world, and as we always say on this podcast, people need a break, and I love that she got a break, even if it was in what I would call an unconventional location for a member of Congress. But listen, do what you will, and I love that for her. The only mayhem, fun knowledge that I'm bringing, rumors that I'm spreading, is I have heard through the podcast Grapevine that in the Mayhem Deluxe album that may or may not be coming out in the near future, we might be getting an unreleased Princess Die, spelled D-I-E, which is an unreleased song that Gaga recorded with Lana Del Rey several years ago before they had beef, and now that they finally resolved their issues, it's coming out.
Okay.
So this is my Mayhem tea that I'm spilling here on the Tent Pod. You heard it here first. Cannot confirm if it's true or not, but I stand by the rumors and the online gossip.
Well, we love to spill the tea. We love to spread gossip here on the Tent. But in addition to Nancy Pelosi going to the Mayhem Ball, I have been getting by over the course of the last week solely basically from the clips that have been making the rounds online of Meryl Streep, Stanley Tucci, Anne Hathaway, who are now shooting The Devil Wears Prada 2. And Muggs, these clips have stopped me dead in my tracks, and I haven't been able to stop watching them on loop over and over and over and over again.
It's back. Yeah. The era of The Devil Wears Prada is back. I am so excited. I will say, when I first got my job here at CAP, I was kind of afraid that I would have a
Miranda Priestley
experience as an executive assistant. I'm happy to report that is not the case, but that was my fear, is the only pop culture reference of an executive assistant. And I'm very excited to see what we get in this next chapter of The Devil Wears Prada.
I mean, it's going to be hard to top the original. Mm-hmm. To be sure, it is probably one of the most fun movies I have enjoyed in my redacted years on this earth. But, Meryl Streep is just, to me, she is one of the very best.
Oh, for sure, 100%.
And I know, oftentimes there are questions about okay, does the sequel actually live up to the original? If there is anybody who I have faith in who can do it, Meryl Streep is going to get the job done.
100%. And I mean, the one thing that I am hoping to see is more quippy one-liners, because as we know, Devil Wears Prada has many a great quote. Something I'm also excited to see, though, is those quotes be taken into a potential musical that is in the works of The Devil Wears Prada.
What?
Again, cannot confirm nor deny, but these are rumors that I've heard that it's in the works, it's the process, and as we all know, I am a musical stan, and so I'll be looking forward to that. But speaking of movie musicals, speaking of sequels, speaking of part twos, I'm still thinking about Wicked Part 2 coming out.
Oh.
If we're talking about movies and sequels and doing them justice, Wicked Part 2 is it's what's getting me to next year, Colin. That is what's fueling me.
Well, we are less than 4 months away. I am also very excited about it. I have promised my daughter to take her as soon as it comes out, and I am not going to let her down. Yes.
Good for you.
Yes. Well, that's going to do it for us, folks. Please stay cool. It has been a scorcher out there in D.C., and we'll talk to you next week. The 10 is a podcast from the Center for American Progress Action Fund. It's hosted by me, Colin Seaberger. Muggs Leone is our digital producer. Kelly McCoy is our supervising producer. Mishka Espy is our booking producer. Haifan, Olivia Mowry, and Tony Pandolfo are our video team. You can find us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.